Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. In the wake of a wave of student arrests, one lawyer has been at the center of a quiet resistance, fighting for justice and rights and the freedom of speech in particular. Ramzi Kassem is a professor at CUNY School of Law. He's the founding director of CLEAR. It stands for Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility. It's a legal clinic and a nonprofit that's been representing clients impacted by post-9/11 policies, as well as immigration enforcement, surveillance, and more. He recently traveled to Louisiana to help free Mahmoud Khalil, one of several Columbia students taken into custody during protests. Through his clinic, CLEAR, the team also represented Moshe Mahdavi and Rumseya Öztürk. These are other people who have been arrested in the course of protesting or for protesting. We're going to talk about those cases and the broader implications for protest rights and how his work intersects with ICE and immigration enforcement and even pop culture. This is somebody who advised the hit show Homeland, so a little bit of Hollywood here as well. Thanks so much for coming in. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me, Errol.
There's a lot going on here, but I wanted to ask you about something because this happened just as you were walking into the studio. There's a congressional hearing going on today. The president of CUNY, meaning, kind of the guy that you work for, was being asked about you by name and about your clinic, CLEAR. This was a hostile question, obviously, and it came from Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from upstate New York. And she's basically saying, are you aware that CUNY CLEAR exists and is doing this controversial work? And the implication is, why don't you just fire this guy? I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, Errol, for me personally, and for all of us at CLEAR, whether it's the attorneys or the students or the other staff, representing Mahmoud Khalil, Yunsa Chung, Rumseya Öztürk, Mohsen Mahdavi, other students who have been detained simply for exercising their First Amendment rights. That's not only our prerogative, as the ranking member correctly pointed out in the hearing, it's also our pride. I am proud and we are proud to stand with these courageous individuals who have done what generations of American students have done before them, whether it's standing up for civil rights, whether it's standing up for the anti-apartheid movement, standing up against the Vietnam War. These students are no different. They are standing up against an ongoing war, an ongoing genocide, standing up for the rights of the Palestinian people, the right to live, most basically. And so we're proud to be doing that work, to be fighting on their behalf. And I fully intend to continue that legal work, as do all of my colleagues at CLEAR.
Okay. How is the clinic funded, by the way?
So the clinic has several sources of funding. We take individual donations from members of different communities, not just in New York City, but nationwide. We're also the recipients of several grants. We do not accept government funds, federal government funds, for a simple reason. We end up often adverse in litigation to the government. And we're, of course, we're a clinic. I'm a professor at the City University of New York. Our clinic is housed, like other clinics, at the law school at the City University of New York.
And the students who get involved, is it because they're interested in say, constitutional rights? I mean,
that's correct. I mean, we draw students who have interest in constitutional rights and criminal defense and immigrant rights, and a host of issues, surveillance law, a host of issues that CLEAR works on.
So now, tell me about, I guess, the current status, not with reference to any particular person, Mahmoud Khalil or anybody else, but what is the legal standing of a student who has protested? They may or may not be a citizen, and the government decides to crack down on them, to detain them until they can ascertain whether they're here legally or something like that. What are their defenses? What is their constitutional standing?
Well, I was going to say my view or our view, but frankly, I mean, this is the uncontroverted view of the U.S. Supreme Court. Persons present in the United States have First Amendment rights. It doesn't matter if it's a U.S. citizen who's here within our territory or a green card holder, a permanent resident like Mr. Khalil or Mr. Mahdavi or Ms. Chung, or a visa holder, or even an undocumented person. All of these people enjoy First Amendment rights. They can speak up on any issue, including, expressing pro-Palestinian viewpoints in defense of Palestinian lives and rights. and they should not be targeted in any way, shape, or form by the government in retaliation for that. I mean, our position is frankly that simple. And that's, as a legal matter, that's the position that we're seeking to vindicate in federal court on behalf of these clients.
So now if there's a pretextual detention, meaning they're saying, well, we think there's something wrong with their paperwork, their green card was improperly, given to them, and it seems pretty obvious that what they're really doing is cracking down on the speech, that it's the substance of the speech that's the problem, that becomes the basis of your legal challenge?
That's right. I mean, and actually you could take Mr. Khalil's case as an example, right? They started by saying, well, Marco Rubio doesn't like what this guy is saying. It was specifically about his lawful speech.
Right, that 1950s law that they tried to,
That's right. And so he issues a memo saying, I don't like what this guy's saying, and we should toss him out of the country, even though he's a U.S. person. He's a permanent resident with a U.S. citizen wife and a U.S. citizen child on the way. They start that way, and clearly, in our view, that is unconstitutional on a host of grounds. And then they shift within a week to add a second ground, which is, well, you left out some information in your immigration application, right? Now, our contention is exactly as you put it, that second ground is retaliatory. It's pretextual. They're just using that as an excuse. It's thin. There's very little precedent for it. Green card holders are rarely detained ever, let alone on things like this. But our position is exactly as you put it. That too is retaliatory. That too is part of the unconstitutional action of the federal government to try to silence dissent and speech.
There's a broad question I want to ask you, but not just with his case, but in general. I am amazed that it took whatever number of days, 100 days, 90 days, to resolve what I thought would be a pretty basic issue, meaning if somebody is snatched up and you're challenging the detention, so you've got basically some version of a habeas challenge that's right in front of a judge, I would expect them to rule on it pretty quickly. Why are people being detained and it's taking weeks and months to get them out pending final disposition of the case?
Well, that's a really important question, Errol. And the reality of it is, we brought these cases, these habeas corpus cases, as you mentioned, on behalf of these students who you named earlier, in a variety of courts. Mohsen Mahdawi's case was in front of a federal judge in Vermont. Rumeysa Ozturk's case was in front of another federal judge in Vermont. Yun Saw Chung's case was here in the Southern District of New York. Mahmoud Khalil's case began in the Southern District, then moved to New Jersey. And every federal judge has their own approach, has their own method, has their own pace. So it just so happened that Mr. Mahdawi was the last one in, but the first one out. His judge moved particularly quickly. Mr. Khalil's judge was, probably appropriately methodical, took a very close look at the legal issues, issued lengthy opinions where he examined all of the issues under all their dimensions, and ultimately released Mr. Khalil on bail on June 20th. And I was there in Louisiana to walk him out of prison. Would we have wanted that to happen sooner? Of course, but we respect every judge's process, and we understand that a judge may want to take a methodical approach so that there's an opinion that's going to withstand judicial scrutiny on appeal.
Is there anything in their guidelines or even in case law that says the mere fact that this person might be wrongfully detained should maybe bump it to the top of the top of the pile, should give it some expedited scrutiny?
Yeah, and to be clear, I think that Judge Farbiarge in Mr. Khalil's case gave this case a lot of attention. He was extremely active, extremely attentive to its details. He was perfectly cognizant of the fact that this was a liberty case. So I'm not at all here saying that he was anything other than appropriately diligent. And again, we arrived at what we believe is the right outcome. Mr. Khalil is now back with his U.S. citizen wife and child here in New York City. But his federal case continues on these constitutional claims that we talked about. And in the meantime, the government is continuing to prosecute its removal case in this administrative system that it controls in Louisiana. And one way to think about it is that the government, this administration wants to slow down the federal case as much as possible, Mr. Khalil's habeas corpus case, and accelerate its own case in its own administrative system.
Got it. Yeah, in fact, that's an important point for our listeners. What we call immigration court, it resembles court in a lot of ways, but it's basically administrative procedures within the Department of Justice, right? I mean, an immigration judge is not an Article III, lifetime tenured federal, presidentially appointed federal judge. they're an employee of Pam Bondi.
That's exactly right. That's such an important point that an Article 3 judge like Judge Farbiar's in New York or the other federal judges that I mentioned, they have lifetime tenure. They're Article 3 judges, as you mentioned. They're independent of the judiciary, of the executive branch. Whereas the immigration judges are employees of the Department of Justice who serve at the pleasure of the president and the attorney general. They could be hired or fired at any point in time. So, of course, there are some implications there for their independence. But it is fundamentally like all of that immigration court system, what is referred to as an immigration court system, is within the executive branch. It's an administrative system. It's not an independent branch of government. It's not a court.
Right. So what is your overall take on what, a lot of our listeners are aware of this. We see this in the headlines that ICE agents are moving around with, masks on. They don't identify themselves. They snatch people off the streets. Those people are detained sometimes for weeks and months at a time. They're shipped to other parts of the country. In some cases, they're shipped outside of the country. How did we get here? And what are the mechanisms, as far as you're concerned, within the court system that could either challenge or stop or even reverse that whole process?
Yeah, I mean, what you're surfacing, Errol, is something that I've been thinking about a lot, since March. I wasn't born here. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the Middle East. In Iraq under Saddam Hussein, in Syria under Hafez al-Assad, and then his son Bashar al-Assad, and in other countries where there wasn't much of a rule of law. And when I see a law enforcement agency like ICE, or specifically Homeland Security investigations, moving around and acting in the way that you've just described, that to me is directly reminiscent of the security services of these authoritarian regimes. I'm not saying that that's where we are. But I'm saying that this administration, to me at least, looks like it is flirting with those possibilities.
Sure.
It's pushing the envelope, it's testing the limits, it's flexing. It hasn't outright disobeyed court orders, but it is doing things that are anathema that I haven't seen under previous administrations that I've litigated against, where they will say such things as, well, unless the Supreme Court has said it, we're not bound by it, or judge, you ordered us to do X, Y, or Z from the bench, but you didn't put it in writing. Therefore, we're not going to do it. Or judge, when you put it in writing, it wasn't specific enough. Now, this isn't outright defiance or open disobedience of judicial orders, but it's inching its way in that direction. And so for me, the bulwark of, for example, habeas corpus, which you mentioned earlier, is particularly important when we're talking about these unilateral, non-criminal executive detentions where people are being snatched up off the street, the way Mahmoud Khalil was, the way Rumeysa Ozturk was. Mohsen Mahdawi was taken from his naturalization interview. He was showing up to comply with, to do what green card holders are supposed to do, which is naturalize when they're entitled to it, as he was. And that's when he was taken. They were attempting to take Yun Saw Chung. We were able to get a court order prohibiting that, simply for participating in a protest and getting arrested the way, again, thousands of American students across generations have been arrested in acts of civil disobedience. So that to me is troubling. And if the judiciary branch fails, if it doesn't live up to its obligation to hold up the right to habeas corpus, for example, then we're in a whole world of trouble.
Yeah, and lest anybody, I don't like to panic people, but it is also my job to alert people when something is changing and when something important is changing and when something dangerous might be right around the corner. And the thing that I think worries me the most is this idea that judges have been sort of sidelined or neutered when it comes to these very basic questions of, do you have the right person? There were stories of people being detained by masked agents who surround the person's car and are calling out the wrong name, drawing guns on somebody, calling out the wrong name. And before you can, even explain to them, because they're not listening anyway, because they're masked and they have guns and they think they have authority, they're snatching up the wrong people. And there's not necessarily a process. And I guess what I want to alert my listeners to is that while this is happening to people that you may not like what they're protesting, what they're saying while they protest. You may not like their causes. You may not know them personally. And you may not even think that they're citizens. But the very next step is going to be that this can be applied to citizens, right?
That's exactly right, Errol. And I mean, I would just take a step back and say that when it comes to the clients of mine that we've been talking about, people like Mahmoud Khalil or Yunsa Chung or Rumeysa Ozturk or Mahsen Mahdawi, frankly, the form of speech that they are engaging in, speaking out against war, speaking out in support of Palestinian rights and dignity and lives, speaking out against what many experts, international organizations, authoritative bodies have called a genocide. That should be commended. That should be celebrated. But even if you disagree with it, it certainly shouldn't be punished in this way. I happen to think that one should not disagree with that. But it is troubling that that's what we're seeing, and I think it's intentional. I think that is the point, to go after people who are unimpeachable. Yunsa Chung, for example, is a valedictorian. She's a straight A student. Judge Buchwald here in New York recognized that. And she rightly said there's no reason to detain this person.
Sure.
But I think that's the point, because once you've been able to set a precedent with people like that, who are no different from generations of American students who have stood up on our campuses for what's right, then you can get away with anything, right? And then you've established and you've normalized a template, a blueprint that you can apply across issue sets to any issue that you happen to disagree with if you're in power. So, after the pro-Palestine movement, they'll go after the reproductive rights movement,
sure,
the LGBTQ movement,
sure,
the racial justice movement. And this model is endlessly useful, because you can start with the non-citizens. You can start even with the permanent residents, like Mahmoud Khalil. But there's no logical limit.
Right.
The idea that, well, when you came to this country and you applied for a visa or you applied to naturalize, you failed to disclose your political viewpoints. That logic can be applied to denaturalize somebody.
Sure. Was Rumeysa Ozturk the one who had written an op-ed? And
that's right. She had written she had co-authored a single op-ed in the Tufts Daily newspaper. And it was entirely uncontroversial fare. It was asking the university to be more responsive to the democratic demands of the elected student senate. But again, I think the cruelty and the sort of radical nature of picking up a person like her off the street, there's a performance to that is part of the message. And they've been explicit about it. This administration has said at the highest levels, whether it's Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, or even the president online, they've said, or the spokesperson at the White House, or DHS, they've declared that the point is to send a message, to chill speech, to silence other would-be protesters. And it's all under this myth that the anti-war movement is a foreign movement somehow. The reality, of course, is that this is not a movement they're going to be able to deport their way out of. It is an American movement, just like all these other student movements before it.
Sure.
But chilling speech is very much the point, explicitly.
Yeah, that one really hit home for me, because I've been writing op-eds since I was 19, right? I mean, I started doing this in college, and this was during the anti-apartheid movement, and I was attacking my professors, the university, the trustees of the university, the Reagan administration, my fellow students, or anybody else who didn't want to get Mandela out of prison, right?
And this is no different from that. And in fact, the students who have participated in this particular student movement have drawn inspiration from the anti-apartheid student movement that you were a part of. They've drawn inspiration from the anti-Vietnam War movement, from the civil rights movement on campuses. Those are the reference points. And when you think objectively about what, for example, the students at Columbia did, they took over a lawn. When I was an undergraduate at Columbia, we took over buildings, and we were not arrested. I mean, we the students in my generation disrupted classes. These students were occupying a lawn where no classes would take place. They did it in an organized fashion, and they were demonized. They were called all sorts of names, and this should be said, by the previous administration, an administration that I worked for. I worked at the White House under President Biden and Vice President Harris. But one mistake that administration made is that it did not stand up staunchly enough in defense of students' right to speak out. And it called them names. And that created political space for the Trump administration to then step in and bring ICE against these students, detain them and seek to deport them.
I wanted to ask you about some of the cases involving surveillance. You were involved in some important cases around surveillance. It's less of an issue in New York, or at least it's talked about less because we've got all of this other chaos that's going on. But in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, there was an unprecedented effort by the NYPD to surveil not just students, but lots and lots of people. It was challenged legally. You were involved in some of those challenges. What was the end result of it, and where does that question stand now?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking about that, Errol, because we are at a potentially a mayoral inflection point. I mean, there's still an election ahead. Who knows whether Eric Adams will be reelected or whether it'll be a new mayor. But it's always important to look back in these moments. And post 9/11, the NYPD intelligence apparatus was basically reinvented in the image of the CIA. A former CIA official was brought in, David Cohen, and he rebuilt that unit of the NYPD, the intelligence division at the time, in the image of the CIA functionally. The logic behind that was that the federal government intelligence apparatus had failed to protect New York City, and so New York City had to do it for itself. Or at least that was the sort of logic that was put out, the rationale that was announced. What resulted from that was, what's colloquially known as a Muslim surveillance program, where every facet of Muslim public and even many facets of Muslim private life in our city were deemed to be fair game. Restaurants, cafes, hookah bars, and of course, mosques, schools, anything that had an Islamic association was cataloged, surveilled. And when it comes to CUNY specifically, every Muslim student association on every CUNY campus was infiltrated in person by informants or undercovers, online. Files were created and kept by the NYPD. As a result of all of that, some of those files were leaked by folks inside the NYPD who are unknown to this day. The Associated Press published a series of stories that earned them a Pulitzer.
I remember that. Yeah.
And as a result of, I think what Muslim New Yorkers considered to be not revelations, but just confirmations of what they had known in their day-to-day life, that they were under a magnifying glass by the police, by the FBI, by Homeland Security. We ended up at CLEAR in collaboration with the American Civil Liberties Union, the New York Civil Liberties Union, the law firm of Morrison & Forster. We filed a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of a number of institutional, organizational plaintiffs. These were Muslim New Yorkers, mosques in New York City, a nonprofit, a student nonprofit. And our contention was that this Muslim surveillance program was unconstitutional. We won a series of rulings along the way that resulted in a settlement. And the settlement was really the first of its kind in the post 9/11 era that reined in the ability of a law enforcement intelligence apparatus, that reined in the ability of an apparatus like that to spy on Muslims. So we imposed important safeguards, including the creation of a civilian representative embedded within the NYPD's Intelligence Bureau to ensure that when they are conducting these surveillance operations, these covert surveillance operations into political activity and religious activity, we're not talking about criminal activity, that they're doing so in keeping with the Constitution and in keeping with the rules that a court ordered. So those were the terms of the settlement, and we're continuing to watch very closely. We're in conversation with the civilian representative. We're in conversation at CLEAR with the police department to ensure continued compliance with these rules, because these rules protect the rights of all New Yorkers, not just Muslim New Yorkers.
So there is someone in the NYPD that is an outsider who is kind of monitoring and keeping track of this?
Correct. So the first civilian representative was a former federal judge, Judge Stephen Robinson. So he became a partner at Skadden, a law firm, and served as the first civilian representative. And currently, the civilian representative is Mohammed Faridi, who's a graduate of CUNY Law School, actually. He's a partner at Linklaters, and he was appointed by Mayor Adams. And he's serving in that position now. And his role is to monitor compliance from the inside, from within the black box. And our role on the outside is to make sure that we're holding the NYPD's feet to the fire so that they continue to comply, again, with these rules that protect the ability of every New Yorker, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, to engage in political activism, to engage in religious activity.
Yeah, this issue has been going on for decades. I mean, I remember the Hanso decree.
That's right.
And then they modified it, and I got into a pretty intense debate with former Commissioner Ray Kelly because he really sort of pushed the limits, and he was on the other side of a lot of these surveillance programs that you're talking about. He insisted, because he is an attorney, he insisted that he was within the Constitution. I thought he was well outside of it, or at least pushing the boundaries in ways that were inappropriate. And it's one of the only times it's ever happened. He called me up and basically cursed me out.
Wow.
We fixed it later. I think he sent me a box of fruit or something like that. But okay. But it was intense, and it was real. And the point being, this has been going on since the 1970s.
That's right. And to be clear, the rules that I was referencing are the revised Hanso guidelines that were revised in the wake of our Raza v. City of New York lawsuit and the continuation of the Hanso lawsuit, which has been pending for 40 years. That's a consent decree. Right. So there's a modification of those rules that builds in these added protections. And so, of course, in that sense, we're also standing on the shoulders of giants, sort of that move. I mean, the Hanso case came out of NYPD surveillance of the Black Panthers, the civil and various civil rights groups here in New York City.
Sure.
And so it's a continuation of that effort.
Yeah. Well, I remember it was a while ago now, but somebody went and found the original plaintiff, went and found Mr. Hanso in the interview.
Yeah, Barbara Hanso was actually in court. The day that the revisions to the guidelines were announced by the judge and adopted. So we have this picture with her. That's
very nice.
That's really something I cherish.
Very nice, very nice. So where do things go from here? There's the chaos is part of the strategy, as you said, and they've been pretty upfront about it. Where Stephen Miller, top advisor to the President of the United States, has said, we want to detain 3,000 people a day, without any reference to whether or not it's justified or legal or useful or appropriate. And we have some pretty good reporting that suggests that ICE agents and other federal agents are trying to chase that number, and a lot of people are getting swept up along the way. Where does that leave somebody like you?
Well, I am firmly of the view that you cannot fight scared. And you have to recognize this moment for what it is. We are in a fight. I don't think we are promised a victory or any victory. We're going to get hit. We're going to take punches. The only thing that I'm certain about is that if we don't recognize this moment for what it is, and it is a fight, then we are bound to lose. And so, we have to stand up for what we believe is right, especially as New Yorkers. We're in a city of immigrants. We have to stand up for our neighbors and our friends and our family members and our communities and defend that. We all have our lanes. I do that in my way through my work at CLEAR as a professor at CUNY. Others will find other ways of doing that. The political pendulum always swings.
Sure.
I'm not sure when it will, but until then, I think we have to stand our ground, and we'd be deluding ourselves if we thought that flight was an option or hiding was an option. There's nowhere to run. I think people and institutions who are keeping a low profile in the hope that the Trump administration will forget about them are deluding themselves. They're simply negotiating their place on a queue to the slaughterhouse. Their turn will come sooner or later. So to my mind, the only rational choice is to stand up now and stand up together while we still have each other to rely on.
What are the students like? What are the CUNY students that you deal with? Where do they want to go? What are their ambitions? Are they absorbing some of the values that you're describing to me here?
Well, not. I mean, it isn't that they're absorbing my values per se. CUNY Law School is a unique institution from its inception. It's had a twin mission. First of all, it's a public law school. It's the most affordable in the city, in the state, and possibly in the country. And its twin mission is to graduate, is to diversify the legal profession along racial grounds, along socioeconomic grounds, and in other ways. And it's to graduate lawyers who will practice in the public interest. So the vast majority of my students, the vast majority of our graduates end up becoming public defenders. They represent immigrants. They represent unions. They're not going to white shoe law firms. And that's by design. So the student who comes to CUNY Law School already comes with those values, those orientations. They tend to be New Yorkers. I taught at Yale before I taught at CUNY. I taught at Fordham before that. My classroom at CUNY is much more diverse along socioeconomic lines. I've had seamstresses in my class. I've had taxi drivers. I've had cops, retired cops, in addition to folks with master's degrees and PhDs, like the profile that you might run into more commonly at Yale or Fordham. So the law school has a unique mission. It has a unique place in our city and in our country. And that's where our students are headed. In a moment like this, I think they're especially cognizant of the weight of that responsibility, that there is a huge demand for the services that they can provide, and they fully intend to do it. On my way over here, actually, Errol, I ran into one of my students who just graduated. He was wearing a suit. He was coming out of an interview, and he was telling me, his name is Adrian, and he was telling me that he's looking forward to working at Brooklyn Defender Services, hopefully. And he's taken the bar in, I think, less than 2 weeks.
Oh, boy. Okay. He had that haunted look, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He was in a rush.
Acronyms buzzing around in his head. That is fantastic. We should stay in touch. I'm going to be back to teaching at the Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY over here in Manhattan. And I see some areas around constitutional law and free speech and some of these other issues that students really should be exposed to, because we have our side of this that we have to hold up, which is reporting this stuff accurately. And I do my part to try and get them to show them how to read a case, how to understand what it's about, some of the basic constitutional principles. But there's always room for more, and maybe we can do that together.
I'd love that. And yours is a profession that I admire, especially in this moment.
All right. Thank you so much for coming by. Best of luck out there. Stay in touch with us.
Thank you, Errol.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Do you want more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of New York City and beyond? Check out our New York One podcast channel in the description. And hit subscribe to let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues